The morning sunlight slipped through the curtains of Keanu's quiet home in Los Angeles. He had just returned from a long night shoot and wanted nothing more than a few hours of rest. His phone lay silent on the bedside table. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the city outside. But then, as if fate had chosen that exact moment, the phone began to ring. It was a call that would change his entire day, and perhaps his entire heart. At first, he didn't answer. He assumed it was another reporter or an assistant reminding him about a meeting he didn't want to attend. But the phone kept ringing over and over until something deep inside told him it was important. When he finally picked it up, the voice on the other side was trembling. "Keanu, it's about Sandra," said the voice, a mutual friend they both trusted. "She's in the hospital." For a second, his world froze. The name alone carried years of shared laughter, unspoken words, and a quiet connection that never faded no matter how much time passed. He sat up instantly, heart pounding. "What happened?" he asked, his voice suddenly dry. The friend hesitated before answering. "She collapsed during a shoot in Toronto. They said she had been feeling weak for days but didn't tell anyone. She's conscious now, but she's not doing well." Keanu didn't think twice. His heart led before his mind could reason. He jumped out of bed, grabbed his jacket, and was out the door in minutes. The drive to the airport was a blur of red lights and silent prayers. Memories of her face, her laugh, her kindness flashed through his mind. He remembered how she always put others before herself, how she stayed after long filming days just to thank the crew, how she smiled through exhaustion to make everyone feel at ease. He reached the airport, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses, his steps fast but steady. As he boarded the private flight, he kept replaying that call in his mind. The silence between each heartbeat grew heavier. He wondered why she never told him she was feeling unwell. Had they drifted so far apart that she didn't think he'd care? Or was she trying to protect him, as she always did? The clouds outside looked endless, and the hum of the plane did little to quiet the storm inside him. He remembered their last conversation a few weeks ago. They had talked about life, about how fame sometimes felt like a mask that trapped rather than freed them. She had smiled that day, saying she was fine, that she had finally learned to take care of herself. But now, as the plane crossed the ocean, he realized that smile had been hiding something deeper, a pain she didn't want anyone to see. When the plane landed in Toronto, the city greeted him with a gray sky. The streets were wet from recent rain, and every drop on the window seemed to echo his thoughts. He arrived at the hospital quietly, avoiding attention. The nurses at the reception recognized him instantly, but the look on his face told them not to treat him like a celebrity. He was not there as an actor. He was there as a man who cared deeply for someone who once changed his life. "Room 217, the nurse said softly. "She's resting now." He walked down the long corridor, his footsteps slow, his mind racing. The air smelled of medicine and quiet desperation. Each door he passed revealed a story, families holding hands, doctors whispering updates, the fragile balance of life and uncertainty. By the time he reached her door, his hands were trembling. He stopped for a moment before entering, pressing his palm against the cold metal handle. He wanted to prepare himself, but nothing could have done that. He finally pushed the door open, and the sight before him made his throat tighten. Sandra was lying on the hospital bed, pale but peaceful. An oxygen tube rested lightly against her face. Her hair was slightly messy, her hands weakly resting on the blanket. The soft beeping of the monitor filled the room. It was a sound he would never forget. He walked closer, each step slower than the last. His voice, barely above a whisper, escaped his lips. "Hey," he said, trying to sound calm, "you really scared everyone." Her eyes opened slowly, and when she saw him, tears filled them instantly. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "You came," she whispered, her voice weak but full of emotion. He sat beside her, holding her hand gently. It felt cold, fragile, yet still familiar. "Of course I came," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides pain behind gratitude. "You're always working. I didn't want to worry you." "It's just exhaustion," they said. But he could tell it was more than that. Her skin was too pale, her eyes too tired. She was always strong, always pretending everything was fine, even when it wasn't. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "You don't have to do this alone." For a moment, they just sat there in silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. The memories of their past rushed in, the laughter on set, the late-night talks, the quiet comfort of knowing someone understood you without needing to explain. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between them. Then suddenly a soft knock came at the door. A doctor stepped in holding a clipboard. "Mr. Reeves," he said, slightly surprised to see him there. "She needs rest, but I think your presence is helping. She's been anxious all day." Keanu nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'll stay until she sleeps," he said softly. The doctor smiled and left them alone again. Sandra turned her head slowly toward him. "You didn't have to come all the way here," she whispered. He shook his head. "Yes, I did. Some things are more important than distance." Her tears finally fell, rolling down her cheeks. She squeezed his hand weakly, and he leaned closer, his own eyes glistening. "Don't cry," he said softly, but she couldn't stop. Those tears carried years of emotions they both had buried: gratitude, regret, longing, and something deeper neither dared to name. He stayed by her side as she drifted to sleep. He didn't move, didn't check his phone, didn't think about the world outside that room. All that mattered was that she was breathing, alive, and that he was there. But as the hours passed, the peaceful rhythm of the monitor suddenly changed. The beeping grew faster and her body twitched slightly. Nurses rushed in, and Keanu stood frozen, fear gripping his heart. The doctor shouted orders, machines buzzed, and in that chaos his voice cracked. "What's happening?" The doctor turned to him, calm but serious. "Please step outside, sir." He didn't want to move. Every instinct in him screamed to stay, but they gently guided him out. He stood in the hallway, his hands shaking, his mind racing. He could hear the muffled sounds from inside, the urgent voices, the alarms. And for the first time in years, Keanu Reeves, the calm, collected man the world admired, felt completely helpless. As he leaned against the cold wall, eyes shut, a single thought kept repeating in his mind: what if he was too late? And then from inside the room, a sound broke through the chaos. The flatline alarm, everything stopped. The sound of silence, the long, piercing tone, filled the hallway like a scream that refused to end. Keanu stood frozen, every breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. Through the small glass window of the hospital door, he could see nurses moving fast, their faces tight with focus. The doctor leaned over Sandra, giving quick orders. A nurse handed him a syringe. Another adjusted the monitor, but nothing seemed to change. The sound, that haunting, flat sound, didn't stop. Keanu pressed his hand to the window. His heart was pounding so loud it drowned out every thought. He couldn't move, couldn't look away. All he could think was that this couldn't be happening, not to her, not now, not like this. Then suddenly the sound changed, from one long tone to a scattered, weak beeping. It was faint, uneven, but it was there. Life. Fragile, flickering, but still fighting. Keanu let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His knees almost gave way. A nurse noticed him through the glass and gently gestured for him to wait. Minutes felt like hours. The chaos inside began to slow down. The doctor stepped out, pulling off his gloves. He looked tired but calm. "She's stable," he said quietly. "Her heart stopped for a few seconds, but she's back. She's very weak, though. She needs rest and close monitoring." Keanu nodded, unable to find words. Relief washed over him, but it came mixed with guilt, guilt that he hadn't been there sooner, guilt that he didn't notice she was struggling all this time. The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "She's strong, Mr. Reeves, but she's been under more stress than she lets on, physically and emotionally." When the room was clear again, Keanu walked back inside. The light seemed dimmer now. Sandra was lying still, her breathing shallow but steady. Tubes and wires surrounded her like fragile threads, keeping her connected to the world. He sat beside her again, silently holding her hand, careful not to disturb her. The minutes slipped by. The world outside the window moved on, cars passed, lights flickered, the city kept breathing, but inside that small room, time stood still. He studied her face, memorizing every detail. She looked so peaceful yet so distant. He whispered softly, more to himself than to her. "You scared me," he said, his voice trembling. "You always pretend you're fine, even when you're breaking. Why do you do that, Sandy?" His words hung in the air, unanswered. He thought about all the times she had hidden her pain behind laughter, all the interviews where she smiled even when she wasn't okay. People saw strength in her calmness, but he knew better. Her strength came from surviving the quiet storms no one else saw. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. It was her assistant, a young woman named Claire, who looked like she hadn't slept in days. "She was filming non-stop," Claire said quietly. "She skipped meals, ignored her doctor's calls. She just kept saying she had to finish this movie for the crew. She didn't want to disappoint anyone." Keanu listened, jaw tightening. "And no one told her to stop?" Claire sighed. "We tried. She said she'd rest after the shoot. She didn't want to look weak." Keanu turned back toward Sandra. His eyes softened, but his voice carried a quiet anger not at her, but at the world that demanded so much from her. "She's not weak," he said. "She's the strongest person I know." As night fell, he stayed by her side. The nurses changed shifts, the lights dimmed, and the hallway grew silent. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the glass. He thought about how fragile everything felt, how easily one heartbeat could change everything. Around midnight, her hand moved slightly. Keanu leaned forward instantly. Her eyelids fluttered, and she opened her eyes, confused and tired. When she saw him, she blinked slowly, trying to speak. "You're still here," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Where else would I be?" She looked away, her eyes glistening. I thought I wouldn't wake up." "You did," he said gently, "and that's all that matters." She closed her eyes again, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm so tired, Keanu, not just my body. My soul's tired too." Her voice was so soft he had to lean closer to hear. "Then rest," he whispered. "You've carried everyone for so long. Let someone carry you for a while." She let out a faint laugh, but it ended in a weak cough. "You always say the right thing," she murmured. He squeezed her hand. "Only when it matters." They sat in silence again, their hands still joined. But then, without warning, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Keanu, if something happens to me, promise me something." He froze. "Don't talk like that." "Please," she whispered, her tone fragile but firm. "Promise me you'll finish what I started. That movie, it's for someone special. I can't explain now, but you'll understand later." He shook his head. "You're going to finish it yourself," she smiled weakly. "Maybe, but if I can't, promise me." He hesitated, then finally nodded. "I promise." A soft relief washed over her face. She closed her eyes, her breathing steady once more. Within minutes, she fell asleep again. Keanu leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The rain outside had turned into a storm, and thunder echoed in the distance. He didn't know what she meant, what movie, what secret, but he could feel there was something deeper she wasn't telling him. Hours later, as dawn crept in through the window, he stood to stretch. He was about to call the nurse when he noticed something. Under her pillow, slightly visible, was a folded piece of paper. He hesitated for a moment, then carefully pulled it out. It was a handwritten note with shaky lines but familiar handwriting. On the top were the words, "If I can't tell you this in person." His heart began to race as he unfolded it, his eyes scanning the first line. And what he read next made his hands tremble. The letter beneath her pillow, the paper, trembled in Keanu's hands as the first light of morning spilled across the hospital room. The note was creased and soft, its edges slightly smudged, as if she had held it many times before. His chest tightened as his eyes caught the first words, written in Sandra's familiar, gentle handwriting. "Keanu, if you are reading this, it means I wasn't brave enough to say it to your face." His breath caught. He sank back into the chair beside her bed, staring at the note. Each line seemed to weigh more than the last. His fingers hesitated to turn the page, but his heart pushed him forward. "For years, I've hidden behind laughter, behind the strong woman everyone expects me to be. I thought if I smiled enough, no one would notice how much pain I was in. But you always noticed, didn't you? You always saw through it." He blinked slowly, his throat tightening. He could almost hear her voice in the words, soft and honest, like when she used to talk to him after long shoots, when cameras were gone and they were just two souls trying to understand the world. "The doctors said it was exhaustion, but I know it's more than that. My body is tired, but my heart, it's full of things I never said, especially to you. Maybe it's the years, or maybe it's fear, but there are truths I don't want to leave unsaid." His hands began to shake as he continued reading. Every line felt like a confession written between breaths. "You once told me that life is not measured by how long we live, but by how much love we give. I thought I understood that. But I realized I never really let myself love completely. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I was afraid it would destroy what we already had." His heartbeat quickened. He could barely read the next words through the blur of tears. "Keanu, I loved you quietly. I loved you in ways I couldn't admit because what we had, our friendship, our bond, felt sacred. I didn't want to ruin it with my feelings. But every time you looked at me with those kind eyes, every time you listened when no one else did, a piece of me hoped you felt it too." He closed his eyes, breathing shakily. All those years, the interviews, the long silences, the shared laughter, everything suddenly made sense. The way she avoided certain questions, the way her smile lingered when their eyes met. She had loved him quietly, deeply, and he never saw it fully until now. "I don't know what will happen to me. Maybe I'll recover and laugh about this one day, or maybe I won't. But if I don't, I want you to know you were my calm in every storm. You were the reason I kept going when the world felt too heavy. You made me believe kindness could still exist in this business." He stopped reading for a moment, pressing the paper to his chest. His eyes were wet, his breathing uneven. He whispered softly, "Sandy, why didn't you tell me?" He continued, his voice breaking as he reached the last paragraph. "If I don't get another chance, promise me you'll live without guilt. Promise me you'll keep being who you are, humble, kind, unshaken. I don't want you to remember me with sadness. Remember me with light. And if you ever stand by the CN Tower again, think of me there, smiling at the skyline. That place always reminded me of hope." The letter ended there, no signature, just a small heart drawn at the bottom. A quiet symbol of everything she never said aloud. Keanu sat there for a long time, the letter still open on his lap. The world outside was waking up, cars moved, birds called. The sky turned soft gold, but his heart felt heavy with both pain and clarity. For years, he had felt something he couldn't explain, a connection that went deeper than friendship, but he buried it too, afraid of losing her. Now her words pulled every buried feeling to the surface. A nurse entered quietly, adjusting the IV. She noticed the tears in his eyes but didn't say anything. She just gave a small, respectful nod before leaving. He wiped his face and stood up slowly, walking toward the window. Toronto stretched beyond the glass, alive and busy, unaware of the quiet heartbreak unfolding above. He whispered, "You always loved this city." He turned back toward her. She was still asleep, breathing softly, unaware of the storm she had stirred inside him. He placed the letter carefully back under her pillow, exactly where he found it. It felt wrong to take it, as if it belonged to the space between them, not to either of them alone. He stayed beside her for hours. Sometimes he talked softly to her, telling her old stories, making jokes she couldn't hear just to fill the silence. At one point, he touched her wrist gently, feeling her pulse slow but steady. That small rhythm gave him hope. As evening came, Claire returned with a bag of fresh clothes and some tea. "She'll be okay," she said quietly. "The doctors said the next 24 hours are crucial." Keanu nodded but said nothing. He didn't want to leave her side, not even for a minute. Claire smiled faintly. "She'd be so happy to know you're here." He looked at her, his expression heavy with quiet sadness. "She doesn't know how much she means to me." Claire paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think she does, Keanu, maybe more than you realize." Later that night, he sat watching the soft flicker of lights from the machines. The rhythm of her breathing became almost hypnotic. His mind replayed her words again and again. "I loved you quietly." Those words echoed through every corner of his heart. Around midnight, her fingers moved again. She stirred slightly, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw him, her lips curved into a faint smile. "You're still here," she whispered weakly. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She blinked slowly, her voice fragile. "You read it, didn't you?" He froze. "What?" "The letter," she whispered. "I saw you when I woke up earlier. I wanted you to find it." He leaned closer, his voice trembling. "Sandy, why didn't you tell me before?" Her eyes glistened. "Because I didn't want to complicate your life. You've always been my safe place. I couldn't risk losing that." He reached out and took her hand, his own shaking. "You wouldn't have lost it, not ever." She smiled faintly, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Maybe in another lifetime," she whispered. He squeezed her hand, his voice breaking. "No, in this one." She tried to laugh, but her body was too weak. "You always say things that sound like promises." "Because they are," he said softly. For a moment they just looked at each other, no cameras, no scripts, no lights, only truth. The world outside could have stopped, and neither of them would have noticed. Then suddenly a quiet alarm beeped again. The nurse rushed in, checking the monitor. "Her blood pressure's dropping," she said quickly. "We need to stabilize her." Keanu stepped back, panic filling his chest again. He watched helplessly as they worked, his heart pounding harder with every second. The nurse turned to him. "We need to run some tests. Please wait outside." He didn't want to leave, but he did, only because she mouthed one small word to him as they wheeled her bed away. "Promise." And just like that, she disappeared behind the hospital doors again. Keanu stood in the hallway, the letter still burning in his pocket like a secret he wasn't ready to carry.